And we're joined by Britt Coulson from Coulson Aviation. This is Kent Mulgat with Jim Check on Kelowna Now. Britt, thanks for joining us today, and we're excited to talk about some of the aircraft that you're bringing into BC.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we understand you've taken in one 737, which would be a pretty large aircraft for a forest firefighting role, and there's more to come. Is that correct?
It is. So our newest 737, the 73700, it's going to have a 5,000 or about a 19,000 liter capacity. It's like 5,000 gallon, 19,000 liters, and it would be probably double-ish the size of what we would typically see here in Canada. So in the world of firefighting, it is a very large airplane.
Not the largest in the world, but up there.
Correct. The only one larger would be the DC-10, and it's about 9,000 gallon payload, but it's classified as a VLAT, or a very large air tanker. So VLATs are much more limited in airports that they can go to, bases they can fill up. Probably not as ideal for the type of terrain, especially that we would see here in BC, where it's very mountainous. VLATs are more restricted to mountain tops and ridge lines and stuff like that. So below the VLAT category, you have a LAT, which is a large air tanker, and those are defined from 3,000 to 5,000 gallons. And that's kind of where this new 737 fits into there.
Maybe Nick can put a picture up over top of us while we're talking, but can those ones, like we see the smaller aircraft dropping retardant, can they get as low in the treetops as they're coming down, or how low can they get?
Probably not as low as, say, like the air tractors, which we would call like a seat, like a single engine air tanker. Um, I think there's some confusion about drop altitudes. Ideally, when you're dropping a product or chemical like retardant, where it's meant to be dropped in front of the fire, coats all the vegetation, and then the fire burns into it, and it causes a chemical reaction and starves the fire of oxygen to slow it down or stop it. You want to make sure that you're at a high enough altitude that the drop comes down like rain. So if you drop too low, I mean, we can all get low, but when you drop low and you see those pictures of, that fire retardant hitting the trees at a forward velocity, you just end up shadowing. And so, you'll have half of your vegetation covered, the other half isn't, and the fire will just burn through the other half. So where we try to target is between 150 to 200 feet. And that gives, the forward momentum of the retardant stops. And then it just is a very nice, heavy rain down and gives a very uniform coverage of the product we're dropping.
So obviously, you are convinced that these aircraft would be a valued asset for any forest firefighting activity.
We are. I mean, worldwide, large air tankers, both large air tankers and large helicopters, are kind of the backbone of the government's fleet. And something like a 737, it gets to the fire very quickly. It's got a large payload, and there's no amount of money you can spend too great in that first hour, first couple hours of a fire, because if you don't get it, it's always going to cost you more money. And so,
I'm sorry. Do you envision these being leased by the BC Wildfire Service?
I think we would be happy to build some for BC. Some of the challenges that we've got with the Canadian market right now is shorter term contracts. So when you look at an airplane like this, say, our 737-300 platform, that's a 18 to $20 million US airplane. And so, it takes a couple years to build them. They're ultra desirable. And so, as example, we were just talking to Alberta, and Alberta put out a contract where they wanted a newer large air tanker type platform this year. But the contract from the time of award to the time of starting performance is only 2 months or 3 months. So, unless you have an airplane built waiting to go on contract with Alberta, there's no way that that we could bid on something like that, because our planning with our customers, we're 2, 3, 4 years out with sequencing of building airplanes, putting them on contract. And so, it takes a lot of planning to get something newer generation with this type of capability than hey, you've got 3 of them sitting around. We're going to contract one because we want them this summer. These type airplanes just don't sit there.
How big is your fleet right now? And I think you had a big helicopter here last year sitting out at YLW.
We did. So we're up to 38 aircraft now. We're the only operator of both large helicopter and airplanes in firefighting. And so one of our CH-47 Chinooks, the one that we had up in Kelowna, it came back from Argentina. It went right to Quebec. It did a great job, worked in Quebec for a few months, and then came over, worked in BC for maybe a week. And it's still actually sitting here at our facility, just getting its tank installed, and then it will likely go back to the US or Australia.
Do you have any of your 38 in your fleet working or contracted this year to British Columbia?
We do not.
Is there a reason for that? Is it just, or is there just they're not having open bids, or just you guys have other contracts?
They do have open bids. I think BC has traditionally focused more on smaller aircraft. And so, again, we don't run any small aircraft. We see the best bang for your buck and the best results out of large aircraft, which, is collaborated by Australia, South America, the US, Europe has a lot of large aircraft. And so Canada is, I'd say, unique in that it doesn't have any kind of large ones. They focus more on higher numbers of small aircraft. And we look at what happened with BC Forest Service and the Mars, right? They get rid of the Mars with a 7,200 gallon payload in place of 3 or 4 single engine air tankers. And, it's just a very different tool. And,
yeah, maybe,
and so they're numbers.
Okanagan residents remember that Mars bomber. Maybe Nick will run a little clip of it. That thing, when it showed up near the end of that fire, it went over my house a few times, and the building actually shook, right? So
those things were definitely amazing to watch.
Yeah, no, it was pretty awe-inspiring, I guess.
So it does sound like there's almost a philosophical disagreement about what the best way to contain. Obviously you'd like to contract with the BC Wildfire Service, but it sounds like they might need some convincing.
Well, we all talk about it. There's no perfect asset, right? Everything is a tool in the toolbox, and some tools are better than others, but they all have a role. And there are certainly areas where the Mars could not get that those single engine air tankers and fire bosses can get. Do they put more volume on the fire? I think that's debatable. Is a larger drop, one cohesive load of 7,000 gallons better than 3 smaller ones at 700 gallons each? I don't think anyone will debate that it is. And when we look at our track record in the LA basin, so we run 3 of our CH-47 Chinooks between Los Angeles, Orange, and Ventura counties. And so in that area, it's very congested. There's more people than all of Canada. It does have, a lot of fires, and, there's a lot of stuff that happens here, but they also burn the most, right? Canada, a lot of fires get away. And so what we're hoping is through, maybe some outreach programs between Canadian agencies and, foreign agencies. They've got great partnership with Australia. They've got a great partnership with the US. Maybe some of that learning could come now that, we're all seeing the climate change, right? We're all seeing global warming happen. We're seeing fires get worse and worse. Hopefully there can be some additional learning. And I think that there are tools that are available in the market that would greatly benefit Canada and, specifically BC, that, could be better than it is now.
So are you one of the largest aircraft services, firefighting services in BC?
We are the largest aerial firefighting company by employees in the world.
So the question that comes to mind, I'm sure for a lot of people, is why aren't you predominantly catering to British Columbia first, and then obviously it's for you guys, it's a business, but why isn't British Columbia employing you guys more often? You'd think that if we have this asset here in our backyard, why aren't we employing it? I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, last year that helicopter sat out at the airport, but was it really put into play?
Yeah.
Is there a reason that helicopter, they're paying a standby fee, but then the helicopter didn't actually get called into the field?
It was perplexing to us as well. I think I think politics play a role in this, right? And from a company side, we've been in Canada since, in BC since 1960 when my grandfather started the company. And so we're not going to beat our head against the wall. We're going to go where we're wanted. And if, the US federal government, US Forest Service, the state governments, the local governments, South American governments, Australia governments, if they all see value and merit in the aircraft and what we do, then we're better to go to where we're wanted rather than try to fight with BC.
I'm sorry, but do you sense that there's just a general reluctance to contract out, that they would just rather keep the work in-house? Is that, when you say politics, is that what's the thing?
No, BC, all their air tankers and airplanes are contracted.
Okay.
I think there were some personal issues with the Mars. I think, when we bought the Mars in 2007 from the timber companies, we looked at it from the outside like, man, the Mars did an amazing job. There's no aircraft in the world, even to this day, that will put more water or volume onto a wildfire than a Mars. I mean, it's just, they were amazing tools, and they had a great track record. And what we had heard after we bought them, because we bought them, we're thinking, hey, this is amazing. We're going to be able to work with the BC Forest Service. We're going to be able to, do a great job for the taxpayers of BC and support wildfires better, get those fires out early. And what we were told was the Mars had a negative stigma attached to it in the government. And because they were owned by a private company, how it was looked at, and Kelowna was one of the specific examples that we were given, is the fires are really bad, right? People are displaced from their homes, people are evacuated, and then there would be so much political pressure the BC government would have to bring the Mars in. They would bring the Mars in, the Mars would do a great job, fire would go out, and then everyone would say, well, why don't you use the Mars more? And it created kind of a bit of a rub between the old owners and the BC government, because the Mars had so much, the population, the citizens all loved it and all followed it. And the government didn't like the pressure. So when we bought it, we were excited, sit down, meet with the BC Forest Service. We're like, this is going to be amazing. We can contract it to you guys. You can use them on initial attack. We can nail those fires down early and it'll be great. And the answer was, no, we don't want the Mars. And we're like, oh man, we just spent all this money buying them. Like, this is the exact opposite of what we thought it would be. And then, I think that kind of, unfortunately hurt our relationship with certain people with BC Forest Service.
When did this relationship sour? Because like I lived in the Okanagan for a long time, and you're right. Like the popularity of that Mars bomber, when it finally did show up, because we heard all this negativity about it at first, and when it finally shows up and as the hero and finishes things off, and then everybody just thought it was like an amazing plane. Everybody went over the fires, but wildfires are one of the biggest concerns for the Okanagan, for sure. Like and for British Columbia and for Alberta, and it just troubles me that we have the largest firefighting aircraft company in the world. And we're not contracting this company. When did that relationship sour? What's the hope going forward? How can we employ that asset here in BC?
We used to work with BC Forest Service quite a bit on our rotary wing side. I mean, we always had helicopter contracts with them. It was really when we got the Mars that, I'd say some of that negativity really stepped in. And then, on the political side, we believe that if we do the best job in support of the ground firefighters and the best job in support of the taxpayers, that, we'll earn the right to be able to work for, whether it's a province or state. And that's how we do business everywhere. We don't, have lobbyists, we don't contribute to campaigns. We don't really support one government or the other, because fire is bigger than that. Fire is the only natural disaster that we have any control over, right? You're not going to do a hurricane. You can't really do a flood, but you can with fire. So it kind of crosses all party lines, right? Everybody is supportive of that. But on the, I guess, the potential negative side is we don't support campaigns. We don't do fundraisers. All we do is focus on our business, doing the best job trying to put the fires out. And I think in BC, I'm not saying it's like that now, but in the past, that has also negatively impacted us. I mean, we've heard people say,
let me see if I've got this straight. Here we have a BC company that's the largest
in the world.
In the world, in terms of aircraft to fight fires. You're bringing in one 737. I take it you're bringing in a total of 10, and so you'll have all of this amazing force to fight fires. And because of some political issues, we may never see them putting out fires here in BC.
Well, put it this way, the last bid we did when BC Forest Service retendered for a bunch of their air tankers, we bid. We did not get any award, and we were told by the government that our company did not have the experience required to fight fires in BC, which we brought up. Well, we've done it with helicopters for a long time. We've done it with the Mars. We do it all over the world. And they said, well, you don't, in our opinion, you don't meet the requirements. So maybe if you guys continue to work hard in the next round of contracts, you'll be able to meet the requirements.
Maybe get a yellow highlighter and just send them back the document where it says world's largest aviation company for wildfire fighting, and just send that back, just that. Maybe that'll help. And I think maybe the public should say something, because like if we have this asset sitting here in BC, it doesn't make any sense to me if wildfires, especially for the Okanagan, are our biggest concern, and we face this every year. The idea is to put these fires out fast, as opposed to letting them linger, because it's usually in the latter days that we see homes go.
Yep, I think some of it also is probably budget, right? Bigger, more capable, newer airplanes cost more money than a lot of the legacy type aircraft that Canada uses now. So Canada's, I'd say, predominantly large air tanker, medium air tanker fleet, it doesn't do anything in the winter. It can't go to South America. It can't go to the US. It can't go to Australia, because there's no other country that would allow it to come in. I mean, a lot of the airplanes are beyond their life limits, and they're operating under, Transport Canada exemptions and things. So, there's this group of airplanes that Canada has, and helicopters that are legacy, in the discussion, they would be classified as legacy airplanes. And then there's the newer next generation airplanes. Canada doesn't have a lot of those newer next generation airplanes. So there's a pretty big cost delta between the two. And our discussion with them is, hey, if you spend $1 billion or $2 billion a year on fires, maybe an extra 10 million, 20 million a year to prevent that. If you could spend 20 million more a year to prevent 500 million on the back end, you'd think that cost benefit would work out. But I think with the budget challenges that everyone has, right? Everyone has shrinking budgets. And so there's two buckets. There's a preparedness budget and there's an emergency budget. The preparedness budget shrinks all the time, right? Everybody is challenged all the time to do more with less. But when a fire comes, that's an unlimited bucket of money. So preparedness, you could have the government saying, you need to cut 2 more air tankers this year because we can't afford it. On the back end, yeah, it might cost an extra 200, 300, 400 million, $1 billion. But that's the $1 billion is looked at differently than the normal budget. So I think that there's challenges with how the government is looking at it and funding these programs as well.
I think the people that lost their homes last year and the years before and the years before that and the years before that would argue that we need as much of these assets in the sky as we can get.
But you always want to leave the door open, right? So you kind of have to be somewhat cautious in how critical you get of the government that you would like to do business with.
So I've another question for you, a weird question. Are you a pilot, and are you flying these planes?
I'm not. So I'm our president and chief operations officer. And so I oversee, the pilots, the maintenance, the engineering. I'm very technical involved in it. So but I'd say more on the design engineering side.
Cool.
But I go up in them. I mean, I go up with the crews.
Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, I think it's, both Mars are going to be ultimately retired this year. One to the BC Aviation Museum down in Victoria, and the other one to Tucson, Arizona, to the Pima Aviation Museum. And so, it's the end of an era for those 2 airplanes. The only 2 in the world. They've, they had an amazing career with the Navy. They had an amazing career in BC. And so we're working on, some programs and, trying to give them the send off that they deserve for the, 60, 70 years of good service that they've done. So it's been an honor to own those airplanes and to, that, I mean, they taught us about the fixed wing air tankers. So it's been an honor to own them, and we're hoping that the retirement places that we chose will do them justice, and more people will be able to see them than are here. And both are going to fly for their last time this year. We're going to have one. Hawaii Mars is going to be launched onto the lake and start doing ground runs in July. So it'll be here through the whole month of July. So people in Sprout Lake will be able to see it. And then Philippines going to be later on in the year. But yeah, we're excited to be able to wrap that up and give them a good final resting place.
Well, thank you. I think we've all learned a little bit about how water bombing works, and we thank you for your time, and we wish you guys the best, and hopefully you start doing some work for British Columbians.
Hopefully one day.
Thanks, Brett. And
all right, thank you guys.
And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.